Contextualising Music, the 70s Part 2. In this video session, we'll recap last week's lesson on glam rock and punk. We will look at some of the other musical styles of the 70s that we studied. We'll also look at some of the key musical icons of the 70s. And we'll compare and contrast two musical styles of the 70s in readiness for the essay, for instance, punk versus disco. So last week we looked at glam rock, and I think the best question we had last week was, so what exactly did you have to do to be weird in the 70s? So if we look back, what did we have in the 70s? We had sexual and gender ambiguity of the stars that we looked at. We had androgynous and camp characters. So with these two we had, for example, David Bowie playing Ziggy Stardust. We had Mark Bolan. We also had Elton John. All of these stars used heavy stage makeup, and it became the norm in the 70s for stars to be wearing stage makeup. It was definitely not cool to be socially acceptable in the 70s. Frankly, anything else went. Also, it was not cool to be establishment, which then gave the rise to punk as we know it today. So in answer to the question, so what exactly did you have to do to be weird in the 70s? Frankly, anything but normal went in the 70s. So what other musical styles were born in the 70s? Soul music, funk, disco, hip-hop, reggae, and progressive rock. All of these musical styles were considered pop music in the 70s musical landscape. So let's take a look at soul music. If we talk about soul, who do we think of? We of course think of James Brown. We also think of Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, and my favourite, Donny Hathaway. And if you remember, we listened to some Donny Hathaway in the lesson. Following on from Donny Hathaway, we had some Teddy Pendergrass and slow jams. We also had some Michael Jackson and some Curtis Mayfield. And if you remember in lesson, we listened to Move On Up. Then that brings us on to funk. Again, if we think about funk, we think about James Brown. We also think about Parliament and Funkadelic. We also talked about Tower Power, who are a funk soul band from Oakland, California. And remember, we had to listen to some of their music. There was also Earth, Wind and Fire. The Meters, which is more of a New Orleans style of funk. Rufus and Chaka Khan. Sly and the Family Stone. The Commodores. You'd probably think of the Commodores with association with Lionel Richie, but back in the 70s they were a hardcore funk outfit with tunes like Brick House. The same can be said for Kool and the Gang. That then takes us on to disco, which makes us think of the Bee Gees and Saturday Night Fever in the 70s. Donna Summer, Kool and the Gang again. Michael Jackson with the Off the Wall album produced by Quincy Jones. Sister Sledge with We Are Family. The Tramps with Disco Inferno. Rose Royce with Car Wash. So let's now compare 70s punk and 70s disco. When we think of punk, we think of the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Ramones in the US, and the New York Dolls. For disco, we think of the Bee Gees. We think of Sister Sledge, Chic, and Michael Jackson. If we were to compare and contrast 70s styles for punk and for disco, for punk we think of mohawk haircuts, safety pins and piercings, zips on everything, skinny jeans, Doc Martens and ripped t-shirts. For disco styles we think of flared trousers, afros, wide lapel shirts, platform heels, chest hair, and hot pants. If we were to compare and contrast 70s punk and 70s disco in the media, 70s punk had bad press across newspaper and TV. There was reports of drug usage, and it promoted anarchy and antisocial behaviour. And there were some very bad TV experiences. In film, it was portrayed in The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. Disco, on the other hand, was very media friendly. it was associated with good times, and in film it was represented by Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta. There are even TV shows dedicated to disco. So to finish off then, when you're writing your first essay, pick 2 styles of music to research and write about that are different and easy to compare. Use as many examples as you can. Think about the cultural backdrop of the periods in history you're writing about. Think about the people who listen to these types of music. Think about the technological advancements that were made to produce this music. And finally, think about how these styles were or are portrayed in the media.